Alright, so I'm going to make a video series on how to build these motors. I had a lot of questions, and I think it's time that I build one all the way from the bottom up. And from the bottom up, I mean from a short block all the way to a turnkey engine. The reason I say that is because, these engines are very finicky, and, there's enough stuff that you're going to have to do and enough processes and enough things to remember that I feel like the short block is a job for a machinist. The rest of this is, an engine builder or a very skilled mechanic can put it together, following all the steps and how I do it. But I don't waste my time building the bottom end. And the reason is, or at least the rotating assembly, sometimes we have to put them together from time to time, but the reason is it's very time consuming and it's a lot of special equipment. And the guys that do this, they do it regularly, and they're gonna catch something. So for instance, we're gonna start off with what I think is there's so many configurations that you can build a VQ37VHR. You can do it as a stroker, factory crank. You can just do it in so many different ways. But the things that I'm going to talk about in these videos is going to be like the most important principles and what you're really going to want to know. And then you can kind of do the math and the part selection yourself, just with some of the general advice that I'm going to say. So this one I'm putting together for a buddy of mine. His friend put together the bottom end, Angel at ACP. So shouldn't have any problems with that. These are drag Honda guys. That being said, wherever you get your short block from, whether it's, the big companies, the AM, AMS, Miami, Z Houston, Z1, Concept, any of those big companies, you're going to get a good bottom end, and that's what you need to start with. So I don't suggest taking your parts to, Joe Billy, neighborhood machinist that says he can do it because he built a 300ZX back in that's just not how these things are put together. So you need to have your bottom end put together by somebody that does it, and they do it regularly, and they're very familiar with the components. So that being said, this is a good one. This is kind of a somewhat bulletproof bottom end in my opinion. So this is a CSS deck modified block, bored and honed for Wiseco slugs, factory bore and stroke, BC connecting rod, stock crankshaft. So I just want to say something about the CSS stuff. So I've put a few of their things together so far, and I think that they have top-notch quality work. I think that their packaging, everything about that company is hot right now. So I definitely suggest them for getting an O-ringed block, and it's also their prices are very affordable. And from what I understand, even the guy that runs it is a very nice person and is willing to answer any question for anybody. So kudos to them. So start off with something good. Start off with a good bottom end. So we're starting off with a CSS modified deck with forged pistons, forged rods, and factory crank, ARP L19 head studs, ARP mains, and this thing will quite easily live and breathe at 800 to 900 horsepower. It won't have a problem. Some people get in, they kind of overbuild their engines or even underbuild them in the hopes of that they're overbuilding it when they really don't know what the problem is. So let's just address some of the weaknesses of the VQ37. And I'm going to go through all the weaknesses. I'm going to talk about gallery gaskets, oil pump failures, harmonic balancers, camshafts, lash. So the first weakness that the VQ37 has when we start with the block, I believe that the girdle system is very strong. I believe that the factory crankshaft is also very strong, pending you're running something like an ATI harmonic balancer. Now from there on out, the rods are strong enough, but then you get into fragile pistons, the deck design of the VQ37VHR is open deck. So you'll notice that in a factory configuration, you'll see these huge open cooling jackets that go around the cylinders, okay? So the problem that these things have is that under extreme high power, high cylinder pressures, high boost, you start to get some deformity in the cylinder liners, and then we only have 8 anchor points for the head studs, or for the head bolts from the factory. So you get cylinder distortion, you get lifting, and then you essentially just scorch a head gasket, and then you know how that goes. So the CSS joint is really nice because they machine it all the way out. This entire part of this, basically when the engine comes up the top dead center on its power stroke, this entire deck is integrated. So, there's not going to be any distortion of the liners or any movement, so to speak. And then you combine this with 18 gauge copper wire and L19 head studs, and I have a certain way, a process in which I torque them, anchor them, and install them that I'm going to go through. But that is essentially combating all of the head lifting problems and cylinder liner issues that you could possibly have with one of these. So if you just start out with that, good head studs and a deck modified block, then you can actually, I hate to say it, but depending on what you're doing. So let's talk about rotating assemblies and the weight of them. So now let's say you have a deck modified block like that, but you're on a budget. You want something that's going to hold 800 or 900 horsepower, but you don't really have the cash to do it. So what you could do is go with a heavier piston, a forged piston, but something heavier that's less expensive. Maybe you pick a JE over a Wiseco, or or whatever you can get your hands on. And then go with a BC connecting rod, or even an Eagle rod or something like that, or a substandard rod. It doesn't always have to be Carrillo, and you know what I mean. Now that's with the stock stroke motor. When you start stroking these things, I really like to see the rest of the rotating assembly being lightweight. I do like to see it, if I got a big stroker, I like to see some Carrillo rods. I like to see Wiseco slugs on it. Not to say that you can't do it. I've done it. Many guys have done it. Put some heavy rods on their heavy pistons. It's just, I don't like the idea of putting a lot of extra weight on the small end of the rod, and I think a lot of people would probably agree with me on that. So if you can do that, now mind you, when you have the heavier slugs and rod, it's a more robust assembly essentially, but if you're spinning them up, you're getting RPM in them. Something to consider. Like I said, heavier rods and pistons on a stock stroke, that's totally fine. But anyways, and now these engines, I 100% believe that that this CSS type of modification will definitely hold well over 1,000. I haven't had one that high. I've definitely had them in the 800s, and I used to run a lot of dart and sleeve stuff. So I've had the dart and sleeve stuff as high as 980 something, but I don't think it's healthy for them. So I'm trying to hit 4 digits on one of these cars that work for another buddy of mine, and I think it'll do it. And it's a stroker motor, and it has heavier slugs, but I think that this is the key to holding these things together. Now, mind you, that's also pending that your forced induction is right, your fuel system is right, all of your other stuff, your tune is dead on, and then you've clutched it correctly. Through this video series, I'll even talk about what I think about clutches, what guys are running. Now, as far as prices on a lot of these parts and components, I couldn't tell you. I put clutches in that are $1,000, put them in that are $5,000. You get into an ATS triple carbon. So you are, as a consumer, the mechanic, you're going to have to make the choices yourself on the kind of gear that you're going to run. So when I get to start working on this thing tomorrow, I'll get into modification to the windage tray, so that the ARP hardware will pass through that. Something nobody ever really talks about. Tomorrow I'm going to O-ring these heads, or O-ring this deck, and then I'm going to show you the process of O-ringing file fitting, things that I do, maybe that are different, or as far as deck preparation. We're gonna do, we'll talk about head gasket selection and what I think about head gaskets. You can absolutely run factory head gaskets on a setup like this. But this particular guy's got some really awesome head gaskets, which I do suggest. If you got the scratch, you got the money, you want a full coated, full jacketed, multi-layer steel head gasket. I'm going to go through the anchoring process of the cylinder heads. We're going to talk about the secondary tensioners. We're going to talk about cam shafts, cam lash, Jim Wolf technology, long bolt kits, timing the motor. We're going to even get into exactly how I lubricate the cylinder liners before I install the heads, preparation to the heads, just to avoid contamination. We're going to go through the timing, and I've made some videos before about how to time these motors and stuff, but I'm going to go very in depth on this to where, you know, almost anybody can actually put one of these things together. So, you know, look forward to that. Also too, I'm not, you know, we're gonna be all over the map. We might even be talking about, you know, how I prep and paint engines, you know, how other guys do it, or my philosophies on it. You know, here's the windage tray right here. You know, I've got some marks on it. I'm gonna take it to work. I'm gonna make some cuts so that all of our ARP hardware is gonna pass through, so that we can retain our factory windage tray. I'm going to talk about liquid sealing. I'm going to talk about primary and secondary high pressure oil O-rings as we go through the process. I'm going to talk about cylinder head, valve train strainers. You know, we're going to get into the VTC system. We're going to talk about the sprockets. We're going to get into degreeing the VVEL motors and phasing them with the control camshaft, which I've made videos about, but we're going to go through it again. So hopefully this will be a pretty decent video series. My buddy has all the cool guy parts. I mean, even silly stuff like front and rear main seals. I might even break down the oil gallery passages and how they work. I got the service manual right over there. You know, try and give back to the VQ community and just, you know, put as much information out there as I have about these.